Welcome to Perspectives from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanigan. This program, using the Zoom platform, pre-recorded on Tuesday, February 9th for playback on air Thursday, February 11th. The show appearing again on WFSU FM. We'll also be archiving it on WFSU.org. There will be a linked presence also on the WFSU Public Media Facebook page. Back in December, gosh, that seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? But back then, the city of Tallahassee, along with many other places, acknowledged the 10th of the month as Human Rights Day, and that observance having its genesis in the adoption of the Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948. And that led to Florida State University's Center for the Advancement of Human Rights, a gentleman by the name of Mark Schlakman, the kind of the head honcho there, to approach Tallahassee Mayor John Dailey with an idea, and that idea to incorporate the principles of the Declaration of Human Rights into the essential functioning of Tallahassee's municipal government. So we're going to delve some more into that today, and also kind of get up to speed on some of the other issues that are facing the residents of Florida's capital city, since we have not had an opportunity to chat with him for a while. So first of all, let's welcome back to these airwaves the mayor of Tallahassee, John Dailey. Mr. Mayor, so good to see you, sir.
Morning, Tom. It's great to be here with Mark. This is going to be a fantastic hour.
It is indeed. And Mark Schlakman, why don't we just start with you, sir? It's, again, wonderful to see you on camera here, as well as hearing the dulcet tones from your office. But how did this idea come up to approach the mayor with an idea to bring kind of an international sensibility? I mean, human rights, that's pretty elevated stuff here, and incorporate that into just day-to-day things at the city of Tallahassee?
Well, first of all, just thank you so much for including me in this this conversation. And as far as how this developed, I've had the privilege of knowing John over the years in his various capacities, previously with the county and now, of course, as mayor. And more recently, his extraordinary wife, who has a significant background in international law and human rights related issues. But Tom, this is about human rights at the local level. And to borrow from Tip O'Neill's iconic phrase of sorts, which John embraced, the mayor embraced, all human rights are local. So, you know, maybe we can get to it if both of you want to, but just to one of the frameworks that the mayor will be leveraging is something known as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's basically a treaty that is derived from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Tom, what you mentioned at the outset is the reason for observing Human Rights Day on the 10th of December each year. That was the day that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948 in the aftermath of World War II. I'll pause after this, but just to emphasize, by ratifying a treaty, the United States government, actually President Jimmy Carter signed this treaty. It went through lengthy review in the US Senate. Following protocols, ultimately, President George H.W. Bush signed the instrument of ratification. And under the US Constitution, that means that this is largely incorporated into US law. So international sensibilities and law and norms, yes, but we're actually talking about aspects of US law that apply directly at the local level, which is one of the many aspects that seemed to intrigue Mayor Dailey from the outset.
Well, Mayor Dailey, let's talk about then taking a kind of academic and esoteric concept here, international human rights, the declaration thereof, all that, and kind of bringing it down to rubber meets the road of municipal government, which, as we all know, can sometimes be a little bit, I don't want to say less elevated, but isn't quite in that same stratosphere. Why did this resonate with you? What was up with that?
Well, Tom, human rights are local. We deal with these each and every day right here in our own backyard. Look, it is an honor and a privilege to be able to partner with Mark in the advancement of human rights at Florida State University. The center is absolutely fantastic. Mark has a distinguished career both in Democratic and Republican presidential administrations. There cannot be a better person to partner with here locally when we talk about human rights. It's fascinating. I just got off a Zoom call with fifth graders, specifically about human rights. And what was interesting is while we talk about human rights, it's so easy to concentrate on what's going on in third world countries or what's going on in other parts of the world, when in fact we deal with the same issues right here in our backyard. Food insecurity, healthcare, fair wages. The list goes on and on and on. Housing, homelessness. I know you want to dive into some of these issues later, but the fact is human rights are local and we are dealing with these issues. 2020 was a fascinating year all the way around on many different respects. It provided so many challenges on the individual level, on the family level, on the community level, and on society level. And if you think about a lot of the challenges that we faced last year alone, think about the protests and the social injustices that bubbled to the top of the spectrum that were being discussed last summer across the world, but right here in Tallahassee, along with the United States. These are real issues. We have to focus on them because that's how we move the community forward. Now, to Mark's credit, I'm very proud and pleased to partner and lead this initiative here in Tallahassee. But make no doubt about it, you have mayors from all across the state of Florida and across the United States that every day are stepping up to the plate to concentrate on human rights issues that are happening in their backyard, because all human rights are local. But we're going to do our part here in Tallahassee, and we're going to move the community forward.
Before we dive into how that applies to some of those nuts and bolts issues, Mr. Mayor, Mark, if I can ask you at the outset, you mentioned that this was really a bipartisan kind of initiative, but that was years ago. If you bring up the term civil rights right now, that is almost a polarizing point for a rather significant part of the electorate. And you will have some people separating just on that term into essentially warring camps. Did you have any concern that maybe bringing this up at a time now when it could be a flashpoint for a large number of people might not be best in the timing department? Or did you think this was the best of all possible times to do that?
Tom, a bit of a variation. There is never a time to look away or avoid human rights issues.
Right.
Every moment of every day for everyone, regardless of who someone is, what they look like, where they're from, what they believe, what they don't believe. This is about a universal meaning, regardless of any distinguishing characteristics. We are all human beings. That sounds so overly simplistic, but we have huge challenges ahead, and we've made progress, but there's so much more at all levels. So this is not, as Mayor Dailey suggested, by any stretch limited to the international. And I would assert these are not academic issues. This is, and one thing that was one of many that was really inspiring when the mayor and I discussed this over the months that ultimately led to his rolling this out, announcing on Human Rights Day. I think the mayor observed, and not speaking for him, he'll speak for himself, but the mayor and I discussed that, he wanted to do something else than just invoke the cause of human rights in the aftermath of the next tragedy. It's to leverage them, to make use of them, to incorporate them into day-to-day decisions that may not have been the norm. And that opens up so many opportunities. So you mentioned bipartisanship. Yes, I mean, the fact that President Carter signed the treaty to initiate the process, President George H.W. Bush signed the instrument of ratification. I mean, that couldn't be any more bipartisan. But really what we're talking about here, this is again incorporated into US law. It's consonant with the US Constitution. And there are a number of different issues, if you want to get to some or any of them later, that we can discuss how in practical terms this works. But again, one last observation for now, Mayor Dailey mentioned, This essentially is joining a community. It's a community that's well established. It's a US, it's an American as it gets community of local leaders taking the position that whatever policy decisions need to be made, that human rights will be a priority. And I'm satisfied that Mayor Dailey is ideally suited to lead this effort in Florida's capital city.
Let's head forward to where the rubber meets the road then, Mr. Mayor. When it comes to things like the current controversy over the temporary homeless facility on Mahan Drive, or the rethinking of the way that our police department perhaps handles certain kinds of street crime, or events that maybe law enforcement is not the best solution to, how do these principles inform those kinds of functions?
To go back and to touch on your original question to Mark and Mark's response about how some of these issues can be politically divisive in today's society. I see my role as mayor to be a uniter, to bring this community together, try to move the community forward together. Very proud to be the mayor of one of the most educated municipalities per capita in the southeastern United States. We take great pride in our civil discourse, in our conversations. We take great pride in getting involved with our government in these all important issues. And so I want to be and continue to be that catalyst in partnership with Mark, to continue to bring this community together. Hey, Tom, we're facing some really tough challenges. And it's important for us to come together. No matter how uncomfortable the conversation may make us at the beginning, I feel comfortable that we will be able to make some great headway on these issues. Okay, so we talk about those individuals that are experiencing homelessness. For instance, we all should come together to find the most appropriate ways to address homelessness in our community, and to take great pride in providing services that truly help each other out. Yes, we're going to have some issues that we have to deal with along the way. But I feel confident that this community recognizes that we need to step up to the plate. We need to provide rapid rehousing, more sustainable solutions long-term. And I do think with all of the partners involved, we can do that. When we talk about homelessness, we talk about food insecurity, we talk about healthcare, we talk about housing, we talk about mental health needs. There's so many variables that come into play. So I see my role as a uniter, bringing everybody to the table to figure out the best path forward, and then helping to execute that path.
Okay, back to your homeless situation there, where you have neighbors in that area who are saying, hey, we have the right to peaceful enjoyment. I remember that term. I had a basic law course in college. That's one of the few things I recall, but that they have a right to that. Meanwhile, there is certainly rights attendant to those people who are the clients of that facility there. So as mayor, how do you get in and kind of balance those things using the principles that we just espoused at the outset of this discussion to inform that conversation, if you will?
Well, I have not met a single individual that does not disagree with the mission of this particular shelter, or quite frankly, any of the shelters, in what they're trying to do to help those that are experiencing homelessness. Now, like other communities, we have rules and regulations that dictate how we open up, how we serve. We need to make sure that we follow those rules. But I do think at the end of the day, and what I am identifying as mayor, is that everybody does have a shared joint concern of what I would consider doing what's right, helping those that need help right now. And I feel confident that as we go through the process, and that we do identify the appropriate places and the appropriate services, we'll be able to meet our goals. Is it going to be difficult? Yeah, there's hurdles in the way. I get that. Are people emotional on these issues? Absolutely. That's why they're important issues to deal with. But I'm also confident, and I'm an optimist in our community to be able to work together to find solutions.
Yeah, and Tom, this also deals with a really basic concept that's often elusive wherever we are. It's not limited to academia, certainly, but critical thinking, challenging narratives, why we do or don't do certain things. And this isn't, it can't to be intellectually honest and level, it can't just be reserved for those viewpoints or positions that we're uncomfortable with or we may oppose. It has to be across the board. Why are we doing things? Why aren't we doing things? This framework that the mayor has expressed a significant interest in leveraging, it's not about the framework per se, it's about using it, leveraging it to try to get at some of these issues. So Tom, again, this is not a Center for the Advancement of Human Rights or even FSU initiative per se. It's the mayor's initiative. And I'm privileged to be able to work, collaborate with him in this regard. But there is an interesting supportive relationship that may develop here. Again, I've discussed this with my colleague, Terry Coonan at the center, who is the founding director of this center when the FSU president was Sandy Dallenberg. That's where this center can be traced back to. But it's highly likely that some of the deans, a number of the deans, because of the different subject matter, may help to kickstart this. And for that matter, the mayor has an excellent relationship with FSU President John Thrasher. So not to be presumptuous, but I'm sure that there will be, if there haven't already been, conversations along those lines. So this is a community effort that will draw upon a wide range of resources, and it's exciting.
And I have had a chance to speak to President Thrasher, and he is very supportive and very excited, quite frankly, of this partnership between the center and between my office and the relationship that we've been able to develop to be able to move forward. So it's really exciting to have such great support. Look, one of our benefits is that we are a university town. We've got these tremendous resources right here in our backyard. And if anything, I think that we at the city should take more advantage of these incredible opportunities for partnership to really be able to accomplish some really neat things.
Yeah, and Tom, the mayor shared with me right away that while I happen to be affiliated with essentially a vision, say it that way, again, of then President Sandy Dallenberg, and that President Thrasher has completely embraced and supported. But the mayor has underscored the importance of finding ways and opportunities to collaborate with, for instance, Florida A&M and TCC, but not just the academic community, the business community, and across the board. So this essentially is a human rights rethink, and the mayor is the catalyst.
At a time when common ground is so elusive on so many issues, is this maybe a central touchstone that when you come to look at any kind of consideration or controversy, that the first principle is, all right, from the human rights angle, how can we start talking about this? Use that as the starting point for the discussions, because everyone can ostensibly agree on that. Gee, this is, human rights are a good thing. All right, no matter where you are on the spectrum, that becomes something that everyone can agree on. And then you use that to start informing the larger discussion as a starting point.
Tom, I'll defer to Mark for more detail on the framework. But yeah, again, one of my jobs as mayor is to convene the community together, to bring together thought leaders from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds. And first and foremost, when you're in, especially in politics, one of the first things you do is try to find the common ground. So what is the common denominator? And I agree with you, Tom. I think that sometimes, even with the most divisive issue at hand, when you have that belief that in fact we are talking about human rights issues, that is a great place to start being able to move forward. I mean, Mark, what else would you add to that?
Well, I think just revisiting Tom's observation, Tom, it's not always clear that everyone completely embraces what they understand to be the concept of human rights. So part of the challenge and the opportunity is to inform and to develop a foundation that what can be done, but also what cannot be done. I mean, for instance, we're not in the local setting. necessarily focusing upon national security, although public safety and protecting the residents of Florida's capital city community are certainly a priority, and maybe we can talk about that in a few minutes. But it's what can be done, but also what shouldn't be done, and respecting principles and underlying. So it's Tom, this is really a remarkable opportunity. As I said, there was some great work that's been done. One of the tenets of this treaty, which again, based upon a treaty being ratified, it becomes part of the legal framework to a large extent. There's a specific provision in it by the U.S. Senate that embraces the fact that these issues will apply to the state and local level. And there has been some significant work in that arena, but by and large, the mayor, not only because we're in Florida's capital city, but the mayor, by joining this community, this effort, we can make some considerable headway. So again, if you wanted to touch upon some of these other issues specifically before we wind out here today, we certainly can.
Well, I was thinking specifically on the suggestion of one of our staff members in the news department. The city has an LGBTQ advisory panel that is now wrestling with a number of issues. And when you get into those kinds of things, you will have some folks in this community who say, look, I don't think those people should have any rights at all. That's a matter of choice. That is not by, cosmic definition or anything else. And you have that kind of pushback that you have to deal with. And how do you talk to those folks and say, well, you may not be right in that assertion?
Tom, I hate to do this, but if I can correct you ever so slightly, it is not the city's advisory council on LGBTQ plus issues. It is the mayor's advisory council. I created it, and I'm very proud of this body. It is one of the first in the state of Florida created by a mayor, because I do believe that these issues are important. Absolutely. Tom, pick your issue. You're always going to have people on the dissent. You're always going to have people that don't believe in what you're trying to do. Again, it goes back to our role as thought leaders and trying to bring this community together in an education fashion, try to find the common ground and be able to move forward. But it's also important as a leader for me to continuously educate myself on the issues. We are elected lay people, and to assume that we are the end all be all and we know everything out there is just not true. And so I'm very proud that I created the LGBTQ plus advisory council. It's the mayor's LGBTQ plus advisory council, specifically to educate me, to help me, to educate the city commission, and also to educate the public and to bring people together.
And Tom, that's a significant aspect, because this is not outreach is critical, but it's not limited to outreach. It is also focused inwardly on how certain processes unfold, who engages. It could even be an issue of staff training. It could be, multi-dimensional issues here. And just to give you a quick example, we kind of touched upon or circled around the national security issues, but within the context of peaceful assembly, and certainly not limited to this, but it applies. There is a remarkable resource that's available through, it's something called the UN Human Rights Committee, which monitors this treaty. That's one of these frameworks. Again, treaty that the US has ratified, so it's a part of US law to a large extent. It provides comment that is, again, very helpful operationally, and it was widely vetted. The US participated, and it's reasonable to assume or conclude that we happen to have very extraordinary, for instance, Sheriff McNeil and our chief of police, very formidable and highly credentialed, but it's reasonable to conclude that there is a lot of information there in terms of whether you call it use of force or response to resistance that may not be known and that on an informal basis could be useful as they individually review their policies. The mayor, I've heard him observe within a human rights context, for instance, equities involving the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. I mean, it's just a thought process that can reach virtually every issue in a constructive way.
And if I could jump into, I have to say on a personal level, I was extremely pleased this week when President Biden announced that he is rejoining the United Nations Human Rights Council. I think that's a very important and a big move for the United States.
That's great. Mr. Mayor, since Professor Schlakman brought it up there, moving ahead here with our reimagining of the Tallahassee Police Department, how do you see these principles working into that discussion? We now know that there are a number of communities who have already begun bringing in some additional resources to law enforcement that traditionally was not a law enforcement function, be it social workers or counselors or whatever else who can be dispatched on certain kind of cases. Do you see this playing into those things?
I do, and I'm very pleased that the Chief of Police, Chief Revel, has been very open in embracing many of the changes that we have brought to the table. Give you a few examples. We created the Citizens Advisory Council. The chief himself created a youth advisory council specifically to talk about law enforcement issues with the youth of our community. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we will be appointing at the City Commission meeting our chair of the new Police Citizens Review Board. We have conducted an audit of our use of force policy at the police department to make sure that we truly are that model government moving forward. But the chief himself has taken it upon himself to do some amazing things. We have worked together to create our new team response unit, which includes a mental health professional, it includes an EMT, and includes a law enforcement officer, so that when we get those calls in our community that are more related to mental health and not violent emergencies, we are properly suited to address them. I think that will have a huge impact on many of the calls that we receive. In fact, the chief has done a really good job bringing new and creative ideas to the table, sometimes having to push a little bit to get them there within his own department, and I understand that. But he has been open to great ideas, new opportunities. We've implemented in the one short year that he has been chief, so many new opportunities that we're going to be moving forward with other great ideas. Look, we've got challenges in this community with violent crime. We talk about this all the time, Tom. We have challenges that a city of 200,000 will have, but we are open to the ideas of moving forward. And it brings it right back to what Mark and I are trying to accomplish by making all human rights local and looking at these issues in detail with the community.
Where you can have contention and controversy over law enforcement, but some of the most impassioned people you can imagine are in the arts community right now. And as mayor, as a city commissioner, you folks are dealing with some of that too when it comes to the appropriation of resources for, I'm thinking, the expansion of the Lemoyne Center. You got some pushback on that. Not to stretch it too much, but these principles help in getting some reconciliation on those kinds of matters.
Of course. Well, I think transparency and democracy is key to the foundation of a successful government. And I think that we have our rules and our processes in place that make sure that we have public input and public participation. And I know my colleagues join me in believing that this is the right step to do. We don't always agree on every issue. And we'll work through this issue as we do all others.
Okay, fair enough. Mark Schlakman.
Tom, just to follow a couple of things. We don't really have time to delve into the backdrop of this, but the mayor mentioned something interesting that a few minutes ago, that the Biden administration was going to essentially realign with the UN Human Rights Council. It's interesting to note that for purposes of some of the frameworks that the mayor will be leveraging here, the Trump administration did not back away from the UN Human Rights Committee, which relates to this treaty. So because of the nature of it, again, this is this is more than international norms and principles, which are important, but this is about US law. So it would have been difficult to back away from this process. So the mayor made the determination that that's the building block that we'll use. We can draw upon all of these incredible resources, but it's the framework is US law. And, you know, they're just recently at the end of December of 2020, 56 state and local leaders from across the United States joined together in terms of similar issues, leveraging some of these frameworks. The mayor and I met last week with Thomas Whitley as chief of staff, and we reviewed, for instance, a resolution from the US Conference of Mayors just several years ago, embracing this concept and the importance of this concept. And among other things, the mayor has asked or tasked perhaps me to collaborate with, for instance, the Columbia Law School, not to make this an academic or a law school project, but yet that is has been doing some extraordinary work in conjunction with the State Department to apply these issues at the local level. So essentially what the mayor wants to do is to have full view on what's been done that's been effective, what's been done that hasn't been, and then we try to build what he thinks will make most sense for Tallahassee. But one more backdrop: so many different groups are involved in this process, and this process goes from Geneva to Washington to Tallahassee. All human rights are local. So some of the very key and leading NGOs and advocacy groups have been involved, but so too have stakeholders like, for instance, a wide range of federal agencies and the departments. Part of my background in the governor's office and the White House and State Department and Department of Defense is knowing to some extent how to navigate the interagency and intergovernmental channels. Well, the mayor also wants to take another look at potential, if not partnerships, revisiting certain relationships and how we can all take advantage of that. So again, many aspects of this, and it really, nothing would go forward along these lines unless the mayor was determined to make a difference.
So let me draw a correlation between your question and what Mark just said as well, specifically when we talk about intergovernmental relations. So you were asking specifically about the vote that took place in regards to the arts funding last week at the CRA. In this particular issue, you actually have 3 different governmental entities at the table. You have the Community Redevelopment Agency, you have the City of Tallahassee, and you have the county. So the question again goes back to, how do we work together? And this is just on the local level, not even including, the other school board and local special districts, but also the state and the federal government. But that's a prime example of a truly local issue dealing with 3 different governmental entities working together for a common goal of moving the community forward, in this particular case, within the arts. Tom, I don't know if you can see, but we're having an amazing lightning storm down here in downtown Tallahassee. Mark, I can see the flashes behind you in the window.
Right.
I don't know if you can see it with me as well, but it's a pretty dynamic storm.
And for listeners who are tuned in right now, as we broadcast this, if you hear a particular assertion followed by a peal of thunder, it is not the wrath of God. It is the aforementioned thunderstorm that is rolling over Tallahassee here on this Tuesday midday. One governmental entity that we are leaving out of this equation, though, which has an awful lot to do with how we move forward in this particular place, is Florida state government. Mark, let me start with you. Have you gotten any kind of positive feedback, any kind of traction amongst lawmakers to say, this is a darn good idea for state government to look at some of these basic principles, and if not adopting them wholesale, at least, giving our full and noisy support to them through a resolution or something? Anything there?
Well, this is my understanding, and ultimately it's how the mayor shapes the initiative, his initiative. But my initial understanding in conversations with the mayor is that issues, whether they be state or federal or any one of a number of other ways we can characterize them, are in play to the extent that they resonate at the local level. So it's not about engaging per se the state government. It's what issues are of significance from the mayor's perspective within the context of this initiative that have a tail perhaps to the state government or the federal government or some combination of interagency. So so I guess the quick answer, and then of course deferring back to the mayor, is there it really hasn't been a priority to go attempt to effectuate any kind of relationship at the state level just to have it, but it's how the issues relate to the local level. And the mayor, I don't know if I've stated that consistently as far as some of our prior discussions, but back to you.
Mark, you did great. And Tom, Mark's correct. While our focus, obviously, to start with, will be immediately in the Tallahassee area, I do know that our success will spread and our story will spread. I know other local governments will be looking at Tallahassee, and hopefully the state and the federal government as well. Let me give you a prime example of state and federal issues that directly impact us here in the capital city. When you have a declared natural disaster or a declared state of emergency around hurricane season, for instance, that has a direct and immediate impact on how the federal government and the state government responds to aid the city of Tallahassee and the surrounding area. These are federal issues, they're security issues, they're environmental issues, they're natural disaster issues, they're intergovernmental agency issues, and they have a direct impact on us. That's just one example of how, yes, we should be engaging the state and the federal government as well. But I know that once we get up and off the ground and we have our successes, Mark, and we're going to have different governmental entities take notice of Tallahassee, and that's going to open up some doors for us to share our story.
Well, and Tom, the conversations that led to the mayor's announcement on December 10 on Human Rights Day, there were ongoing informal conversations with the State Department, with other elements of the federal government, just given the nature of the framework, even though, again, it's incorporated into the US legal framework. It is a treaty, and there are counterparts across the world. So, and there was enthusiasm. And just remember that the timing, that was during the previous administration. So this goes back to one of your earlier questions. It's not necessarily, who is a D and who is an R. It's transcending those issues and leveraging human rights and the frameworks that relate to it to achieve meaningful change.
A quick but connected aside, since Mr. Mayor, you mentioned emergency response. A problem with a small Florida community's water system being hacked into essentially and assaulted by cyber folk. How are we doing here with not only our water system, but also city electric? I imagine there are remote access points for city power as well as the water system. So we looking to beef up security there right now?
Tom, I'm not familiar in great detail of what exactly happened at that one particular community, although knowing that it did happen. Yeah, I'm here to tell you that we live in interesting times and we live in different days. And by the fact that the city of Tallahassee owns all of the utilities, it is front and center. Security, cybersecurity, potential attacks on our IT system, on our physical infrastructure. Sure, these are all things that we should be concerned with. Now, we work hard each and every day to be as safe as we possibly can, to deliver reliable electricity, safe water, stormwater, wastewater, natural gas, the IT security of City Hall and all the documents and how we operate on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely, it's crucial. Does it keep us concerned? Sure, it should be a priority. We should do everything we possibly can to keep it safe. Another great example of how we can also work with the state and the federal government, whether it's through a law enforcement perspective and intelligence gathering, or whether it's in the security and an infrastructure standpoint, there's always work to be done, but it is a priority.
Okay. Mark Schlakman, a persistent problem here in our community and one that has bedeviled multiple administrations in City Hall and also over at the courthouse has been the, let's call it the 32304 question there, with that particular zip code, at least on paper, having the lowest household income of any Florida subdivision there. How do you see the human rights issue playing into that as far as the ability of local governments to respond to those needs?
I think I can probably answer that broadly. Again, the human rights related sensibilities and considerations apply to virtually every issue every day. And the difference is, so you may ask, okay, so what's new? Well, it's a different point of entry. It's a different analysis. It's almost like an accountability in addition to what systems and protocols are in place. It's trying to respond to the question. I mean, whether it's certain policies that have been formulated or policies that haven't been. I mean, this is another check on it. It's another perspective. So, to think broadly in terms of, okay, what are the human rights dimensions to this? And this is not as the mayor indicated to me. Again, this is the mayor's initiative, as he clarified, not the city's per se, but this could identify city programs or policies that maybe don't quite pass muster in terms of some of these sensibilities, and there would be cause, therefore, to revisit them. So, it's really level. It's across the board. It's a different kind of criteria for critical thinking. So while I haven't pinged the specific issue, I think that can be applied across the board to all issues, including those that you raised, Tom.
Okay, your thoughts, Mr. Mayor, on that?
I would simply, number one, I agree with Mark, but I would simply ask that as we approach this issue through critical thinking, we should also maybe approach it in a different manner. Let me give you a different perspective. Instead of approaching it on a zip code level, I think we should approach it on a census data level. We should truly drill down on the neighborhood level, the street level, if not the household level, to truly identify the needs, the concerns, which in turn are human rights issues. Is it healthcare? Is it all the elements of poverty? Is it housing? Is it equity? Is it equality? Is it social justice issues? Is it law enforcement issues and crime issues? But I think that we should definitely look at it from a different perspective. Tom, when we look at 32304, we have serious issues that need to be addressed. Tom, in 32304, we also have a student population that might skew some of our numbers depending on the issue we're dealing with. So I think to really be able to address the issues, I would like for us to start thinking about it on a census tract level, drilling down to the neighborhood, the street, and the household, instead of just a zip code area per se. It's just one idea of a different approach through the critical thinking process.
A quick reminder, if you miss any or all of any Perspectives program, you can find it online at our WFSU.org website. We try to have the most recent program up as soon as we can after it airs on the radio, so you can hear it again and again whenever you want. Folks, tempus fugit, as the old saying goes, and I want to give us an opportunity to kind of bring this one in for a coherent and certainly a crash-free landing on what has been a really fascinating discussion of a new approach to local governance, if you will, having a more unifying principle perhaps than we did heretofore. So as way of some summation statements, Mark Schlakman, if you can talk about maybe, since you advanced this idea to the mayor and got his enthusiastic buy-in on it, do you have any other examples beyond what you had mentioned there in the national and even the international realm? Some other places where this has worked and worked really, really well. And hey, here are some success stories we can hold up. And
well, again, I'm glad you mentioned that, because part of what the mayor has asked me to do is to coordinate with, I may have mentioned earlier, the Columbia Law School Human Rights Institute, which has done some extraordinary work recognized by the US government, regardless of whether there's a D or an R in whatever offices around the country. So we're going to get a pretty good granularity in terms of the kinds of things that have been tried and succeeded, and for that matter, not. And then we'll ask the question why. We don't presumably have time to delve into it, but maybe I should just mention this concept of applying at the local level consistent with the treaty. I had the privilege of being in Geneva in 2014 when the US delegation appeared before the UN Human Rights Committee, which is the treaty body. It's not different political divisions of different countries. These are subject matter experts that question, regardless of which nation is before them, ask the why not questions. Why isn't this being addressed? So the US delegation, largely federal, but it had the Attorney General from Mississippi at the time representing states and the mayor of Salt Lake City. It went into that level of detail, and it's promoting accountability throughout the world. And it's not to impose, quote, the international views upon localities, it's to leverage them. So Tom, I think there's much more to come. That might even be an interesting follow-on at some point, a little more detail in terms of that process. But it's exciting, and I think that it would not be unreasonable to conclude that I think you'll be hearing much more about this as the mayor proceeds.
Okay, and Mr. Mayor, did you get buy-in, since you are one of 5 on that city commission there? How do your colleagues feel about this? Are they on board?
I know that my colleagues join my passion to move this community forward. We are in agreement of our priorities as we set them at our annual retreat. And I know they're committed to moving the needle. And so, yes, I believe that they support this initiative. I'd just like to close by saying I am blessed to have a good friend at Mark Schlakman, who's also an issue expert. We are blessed as a community to have such incredible resources. We are blessed to have citizens that want to get engaged and truly do good and talk about these issues. And I am very excited about our initiatives because at the end of the day, all human rights are local.
Mr. Schlakman, you are always thinking ahead. If you can, maybe a little spoiler alert here, but can you give us a preview of what you think the next initiative might be that you come up with to say, hey, here's something that would also be helpful on whatever level of governance? What are you looking at?
Well, I mean, so the mayor, in addition to getting a national insight into what's worked around the country, we're also at the mayor's behest looking at potential local partners that will engage, whether it's public square kind of platforms or other collaborations with other agencies already mentioned, ultimately involving, while this is not an FSU or a Center for the Advancement of Human Rights initiative per se, certainly the resources and there's interest to make a meaningful difference, community service at the local level. So I think, as I said, in this, it's not to be understated. I think the mayor's commitment on December 10, you will continue to see meaningful aspects of this in the months ahead, Tom. So again, without pulling out a calendar, I think there may be cause to chat again sometime soon.
And Mr. Mayor, you get the last word on this one, sir.
Stay tuned. We are putting the program together. We are fresh off the launch, but I can guarantee you that it's going to be meaningful and we're going to make a positive difference in this community.
Gentlemen, it's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for giving us an update on how Tallahassee, now fully committed to being a human rights supportive community, and what all that may mean as far as moving ahead with issues of governance and service to the folks who live in Florida's capital city. Mark Schlakman, Mayor John Dailey, thank you all so much for being a part of this Special Perspectives. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Mark.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Perspectives produced by WFSU Public Media in Tallahassee. And thanks also to Taylor Cox, Paul Dam, Amy Diaz de Villegas, Brandon Brown, Tricia Moynihan, and Lydell Rawls, our Director of Content, Kim Kelling, Executive Producer. I'm Tom Flanigan, be filling in for Gina Jordan for a couple days next week, and we will circle back at a future point with more conversation right here on Perspectives. Take care.